Okay.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Amy Snyder from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us for the Connect and Communicate series presenting Microfilm Enters the Digital Age, a Big Evolution for a Microformat. This discussion will be recorded and it will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA CRD YouTube channel, as well as sent to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset or speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right throughout the discussion. Those might be answered as we go along, or we might hold them till the end. We'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues, so please put those in the chat box as well. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate Planning Committee members, including Adam Balchunas, Christy Alderman-Ritter, Diane Porterfield, and Ronali Choco. Please contact any one of the team for information about becoming a PALA member. This project is made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education through the Office of Commonwealth Libraries and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Commonwealth Governor. And finally, I'd like to thank and introduce our presenters for today's session. Ashu Kumar is Library Manager, Microform and Government Information at Penn State University's Libraries. Sandy Morgott is the Services and Microforms Collections Assistant at Penn State University Libraries. Eric Novati is History Librarian at Penn State University Libraries and co-heads the Microforms and Government Information Unit. Dan Peters is the Systems Design Specialist for Penn State University Library Strategic Technologies. So welcome, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for the PA Library Association the College and Research Libraries Division for inviting us today. And thanks to everyone for joining us. It's a lovely day out there, and I know some of you are enjoying lunch, and you might very well want to do it on a bench outside, but you've joined us to talk about microforms today, so awesome. My name, as mentioned, is Eric Novotny, and as co-coordinator of the Microforms and Government Information Unit, it is my distinct pleasure to share what we consider to be some exciting new developments in access to microforms. As mentioned, I'm joined by my colleagues, also in Microforms and Government Information, Ashu Kumar and Sandy Morgart, and Dan Peters, who works in Library Strategic Technologies. Although I'll be doing much of the talking today, I want to be clear that this is a team effort, and much of the actual work was done by my less talkative colleagues. I am very grateful for their willingness to go the extra mile to advance user services under challenging circumstances. I want to also thank Adam for his guidance throughout the process, and just say that we look forward to a robust conversation, and I'm very interested in learning about some of the things you're doing or what you might be hoping to do. Now let's see if I can actually advance a slide. Woo! All right, first technological hurdle cleared. So first, a little bit about us. Microforms and Government Information is a relatively new unit at Penn State. We formed several years ago when the microformat collections were combined with the government documents collections. We are a patron-centered welcoming service accessible to advanced scholars, new researchers, and community members. Although the staff and collections are physically at the University Park campus, we strive to foster access across locations. As some of you know, we have libraries across the Commonwealth. I will be focusing on microforms today, but should note that we also engage in outreach and collection support for government documents, and those efforts are led by our political science librarian, Andrew Dudesh. In our current space, we house a wide range of microformat collections, including over 96,000 reels of microfilm, 144,000 microfiche, and 12,000 micro-opaque sheets, along with the equipment to read, view, and make digital scans of the content. And on the slide, you can see on the left-hand side, or my left-hand side, are the government documents collections. On the right-hand side are the microformat machines, which are in those cubicles you can see people sitting at. That's the equipment that people use to access our microformat materials. And there are many treasures amongst these hundreds of thousands of items, ranging from the personal papers of US presidents, original records from colonial Latin America, and many Pennsylvania and national newspapers preserving unique local history and national events. Unfortunately, these valuable resources were underutilized due to difficulties accessing the material. Many users, and in particular undergraduates, can find the format intimidating. Scholars not at our University Park campus had a harder time accessing our collections from a distance. Our staff are very enthusiastic about assisting users, and our website, which you can see on the screen, promotes our services and resources. But we felt we needed to be more proactive at reducing barriers. We wanted to democratize access to this information, regardless of status or location. In our remarks today, we will discuss how we made it easier for anyone to take advantage of the considerable resources available to them in Microformat. And that is not what I wanted to do. Nah. Let's try that again. Fortunately for us, as we were thinking about ways to enhance access, the pandemic hit and completely upended our normal operations. What a stroke of luck. The Penn State libraries closed to the public in the summer of 2020. While closed, we were regularly contacted by patrons needing access to material only available in Microform. Our initial response was to make scans for patrons, and we started doing that once our staff were cleared to safely return to the building. One early request involved finding data from the Jewish population of Poland using the 1921 census of Poland, which we had on microfilm. Other requests included information from Pennsylvania newspapers and an undergraduate student researching her honors thesis who needed pages from a magazine published by the Ku Klux Klan. While this scan service worked well for those who contacted us directly, we wanted to make this option more visible. With invaluable support from colleagues in library strategic technologies, cataloging, and interlibrary loan, we were able to place a request a scan link in library catalog records for items in the Microforms area. While staff were already making scans for users who knew how to contact us, having the link prominently in the catalog records dramatically increased the visibility of the service and made it much more convenient for users to access and obtain needed materials as they discover them. So this on screen is a record from our library catalog, and you can see under availability, it gives the location, the call number, and then for location, where usually it would indicate which floor the item is located on. In this case, there's a request to scan Penn State users link. So users can simply discover this as they're searching our catalog. They don't need to know anything about microfilm or what it is or how to access it. They'll just stumble across this at point of need, as we say. And there we go. So when a patron clicks on that link in the catalog that says request a scan, they're taken to a custom request form developed by our colleagues in interlibrary loan. If you squint, you can see that the form is partly populated for them with information pulled directly from the catalog record, including the call number and the title, which helps our staff discover this material, pull this material. The patron can add additional information or any notes they wish to add, and then all they need to do is click on Submit Request. We do have some other information about the parameters of the service, but I suspect most patrons kind of blow past that, and that's okay. We prefer that they contact us, and then if it's something beyond what we'd usually do, we can have that conversation. So the direct request option and that link that appears in the catalog it does require you to log in with a Penn State account. So it's limited to Penn State faculty, students, and staff. But it is available to those users at any of our locations, despite the material being at University Park. So if you're attending today and your patrons are interested in a scan, they would submit a request through the normal interlibrary loan process, and we would do a similar thing. We will scan up to 50 pages, and this is due to both staff constraints and time constraints, and also copyright concerns about reproducing an entire reel. We have found, as I said, that many patrons don't notice that there is a wording about the 50-page limit on this request form, but most folks blow right past that. But that just gives us a chance to talk to them about what they actually do need. Making this service more visible has proven to be very popular. Users can easily get the material they want, and we've enjoyed seeing some of the interesting and esoteric topics that our patrons are exploring. This slide shows data we collected for scan requests we received in fall 2021. It is gratifying to me to see use from populations we might not expect. And on the left-hand side, you'll see our users, and that includes a significant number of staff as well as undergraduates requesting scans. And these are populations who may not have used this material previously. It's also interesting to see the requests are from across the curriculum, and that's the column on the right-hand side. While it may be assumed that old materials on microfilm are only of interest to a select few in the humanities, as this chart shows, we've received requests from patrons in material science, engineering, ecosystem science and management, food science, and from the dean's office, to name just a few. This data strongly confirms our belief that if we make microforms easier to access, the material will get used, and not just by our usual customers who already know about us. Patrons have asked for scans from old Penn State course bulletins, early childhood books, as well as from our collection of Pennsylvania and national newspapers. Additionally, the scan option has helped promote equity of access across the Penn State locations. Previously, users at campuses other than University Park would have requested the reels, waited for delivery, and then used them locally. We suspect many gave up and moved on to more convenient information sources. Now we can fill at least some of those requests, and as the slide indicates, the middle column, we have made scans for patrons at many different Penn State locations. Of course, some users need more than the 50 pages that we will usually scan. They may need to browse several weeks of a newspaper, for example, if they are analyzing media coverage of the 1936 Olympics. Our most recent request was actually from a history faculty member who needed 3 reels, which was more than we could scan for her. She was not surprised that that was the case, but she was also reluctant to come to the library in person. She didn't say, but presumably due to lingering COVID concerns. For those users, we offer an exciting option launched during the pandemic: remote access to microforms. Penn State users can access the microform collections in the library from the comfort of their home, the beach, the office, or wherever they happen to be. This is facilitated by the WebLabs application. Patrons schedule a time using a form on our website, which is what you see on the screen. We usually respond to requests in 48 hours, and during that 48-hour window, Dan Peters from Information Technology authorizes the patron to access specific machines in the library using WebLabs. I'll let Dan explain how that works, and then we'll take a look at what patrons see. So over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Eric. So general overview of WebLabs implementation at Penn State. Of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, with nobody on campus and all instruction taking place remotely, we had a very large number of typical student use computers sitting around the library that were idle. Nobody was using them. The thing with these computers is they do contain a large amount of software, wide variety of software, courseware that students use. For example, SolidWorks, AutoCAD, MATLAB, maybe for engineering students. Penn State wanted to offer a way for students to be able to access this software, which is expensive software and expensive for a student to license on their own, to access it remotely from home, wherever they happen to be during remote instruction. So Penn State actually ended up centrally purchasing licenses for a piece of software from Ericom, is the company, called Ericom Connect. So what this piece of software did, it was essentially a little client that got installed on the computers, and it allowed patrons to remote into the computers right from their web browser. So they didn't have to install anything at all on their end. They just had to go to a web page and they would be connected to one of these computers that would otherwise just be sitting there idle. At that point, they were able to log into the computer just as if they were sitting in front of it and had access to their entire roaming profile and all of the software on the computer. We ended up, taking all of our idle computers and putting them into essentially a group that would show up in WebLabs that would basically a patron would go to our WebLabs site, click on the computer group, and then they would be basically connected to a random available computer. They didn't get to choose a specific computer. It was a pool of them. So whatever one was available, they would be connected to, and then they could log into it. Right around this time, we started having discussions with the Microforms and Government Information team about how to adapt this in order to bring the Microforms service remote. So what we were able to end up doing was, as Eric mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's 4 microfilm scanners in their area. It was 3 at the time. Actually, we have added one since. But what we ended up doing is, rather than having a pool of computers for these, we ended up creating basically each computer as an individual group. So it was very specific about which computer you would connect to because it was the only one in the group. So that's kind of how we adapted it to make sure that, if someone scheduled a time to use the microfilm computer and scanner, it would be available for them because it wasn't in a pool. And that also ensured that we could get the user connected to the correct computer where their microfilm was already set up for them. So part of this, we had to go through a vetting process where basically every piece of software on the computer had to be vetted for remote use. Penn State wanted to basically make sure that any software that was going to be accessed remotely was included in our license to be able to do so. So luckily, Penn State did a lot of the legwork for this. They vetted all of the software that's kind of on all of the student use computers across the university. So that helped us out a lot. The only software we had to worry about was anything that we add custom in the library, and of course the microfilm software, because that would be running remotely as well. We reached out to our vendors and they had no problem with that. They were actually intrigued that we were going to try to do this. So, once we got past that process, basically the only thing we had to do was, and once again, Penn State made it really easy to enroll these computers into the WebLabs service. And that enrollment process, it basically just changed some power settings on the computer to ensure that they were always awake, because typically our computers will go to sleep. So we don't want them to go to sleep if they're being accessed remotely. It also did some, disabled printing so that they weren't able to print to the printers in the library anymore, because they obviously wouldn't be here to get their print jobs. So those were a couple of the settings that were changed. And of course, the most important part was the little Ericom Connect client was added to the computer, which made it available in WebLabs at that point once the group was enabled on the back end. So we went through that process. It was, decided, like I had mentioned, that each computer would kind of be its own security group, and that's exactly how we controlled access. Each of the microfilm computers in WebLabs had a corresponding security group and Active Directory. So by default, nobody had access to these groups, as opposed to the general open pool where kind of all patrons, all faculty and staff, all faculty and students at the university had access to it. Staff didn't automatically have access. That was a special grant that we could do. But we basically gave all of us access to these, so any of the Microform staff could see the computers, and IT could. And basically what happened is, Eric mentioned, patrons would request the service to be used remotely, and I would add them to the group. And then that way, whenever they browse to the WebLab site, then they would only see the computer that they were going to be using. So it eliminated confusion there. They didn't have to pick the right one. We took care of all of that for them on the back end. As Eric's showing you there, that's one of our microfilm scanners, number 6. So that's what they would see if they went to WebLabs. And at that point, they would click on that computer, they would be connected, and everything would look basically as if they were sitting at the computer itself. So we did a little bit of scheduling agreements between IT and Microforms to make sure all the patrons were scheduled at correct times and had access at the correct times, and that their access would be pulled away once they were done with the scanner. So once we got used to that process, everything has been going pretty smooth since. And that's the general overview of how we were able to bring the computers to the web, essentially, for microfilm. So I'll hand it back over to Eric now to go over more of the details.
Yeah, so thanks, Dan. Thanks for obviously all your work on setting this up. So a little bit of an overview. Once the WebLabs authorization is done by Dan, the patron receives a calendar invite and an email from Ashu Kumar, our Microform supervisor, confirming the request and sending the WebLabs link, which takes them to the screen we're looking at now. Ashu also schedules a staff person for that time and works to confirm that the item requested is actually on the shelf and available for use. At the scheduled time, the patron, using their personal device, not a library computer, clicks on the link in the email and connects to the Penn State Remote Labs site. They will see the microfilm scanner that they've been assigned and authorized to use. And then selecting that machine will bring up the desktop. This is the desktop of one of the machines that's physically located in the Microforms area. It's a screenshot of that desktop. So the patron can be at the coffee shop or wherever, and they will see this desktop, which has the usual software that they would get at a Penn State desktop. It has Microsoft Office and other, it also has a lot of our scans. So you can see the PDFs that we've saved for individuals. But then most importantly, it has the PowerScan 3000 software. And this is what patrons will use to view, browse, and manipulate the micro content. So once they select that Scan Pro 3000, they get this initial screen, which allows them to select, and I've been using the word Microforms. Initially, this only worked with microfilm, but we've been able to broaden it out with our newer machine to use fiche and opaque and other formats that you see listed here. So we can now do this with more than just microfilm. And so the patron would select the format that they're using, and we would tell them that if there's any ambiguity or help them out. And then they would be connected to the Scan Pro 3000. And this is not a terribly exciting screen because we haven't loaded the microformat yet. So our staff do need to be in the library to load the reel or the fiche for the patron who is working remotely. That's one reason we require a reservation in advance. So this screen is not terribly visually interesting, but what I want to highlight is, besides the role of our staff, is that the patron can use the full range of options on the right and bottom parts of the screen. So on the bottom, you'll see the arrows for the fast forward and rewind capabilities. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see all of the options that they would have if they were actually here in the building. They can zoom, they can adjust the brightness and the contrast, they can auto crop the image, rotate, whatever it is that they need to do. So they can navigate the film or the fiche, and they can also adjust the image. And we'll take a look at some examples of that. And so here is an example of a publication that was loaded for the patron. And you can see the image is quite blurry. So the patron can use our focus feature over here on the left, and they can sharpen that image up. If they needed to straighten it out, they can use the straightener feature as well. One of the only drawbacks that we've seen, this is an example of that same page, but it's been magnified so you can see more of the adjoining page and see the entire page. We don't have control over the patron's screen size. So if they're using a laptop or something with a smaller screen than what we have in the library, that will kind of scrunch the image up a little bit. But that, that's just something where it's particularly an issue for newspapers where the pages are a little bit larger. And then finally, when the patron finds content that they want to scan, you'll see that this page has been marked with this green outline. That highlighted content can be saved. The patron has full access to their own desktop, so they can save that material to their own device. Again, doing this all entirely outside of the library. They do not need to physically be in the library to do any of the stuff that we've just looked at. They can scan a single page. There's also an option to create multi-page PDF and TIFF formats files as well. And then so they can scroll through using the navigation features, adjust the image, scan the content that they're interested in, all from they can be in their pajamas working from their home office if they're so inclined. We think this is super cool. I hope we've conveyed that. Let me get on to the next slide there, Sandy. So even for patrons who have used microfilm in person previously, there can be a bit of a learning curve with the remote option. So to ensure that folks have a positive experience, we schedule a staff person on Zoom to answer any questions. This is similar to having somebody on our service desk. Patrons can communicate directly with our staff during their session using Zoom audio, video, and chat. In this case, Sandy Morgart is performing that role on this slide and has posted a short welcoming message, which if you squint, you can see right at the bottom right-hand side there. So we just will welcome the patron, let them know that we're available, and then they can contact us as they're going through. We'll get them set up, answer any questions that they might have. And I would say, users are very grateful for this personal introduction to this new way of accessing microfilms. Sometimes they can be they're not really, sure what this experience is going to be like. We have found that patrons who use this service more than once are often able to work independently once they've got a little bit of experience under their belt. So that's basically the remote service in a nutshell. And whoops, went too far. As I said, we're very excited about this addition, which allows patrons to access microfilm without needing to physically come to the library. As with every new service, we are tracking usage and gathering user feedback. And so far, the feedback we've gotten has been tremendously positive. If you're interested in learning more beyond today, we'd be happy to share our experiences, and we'll include our email on the last slide. Finally, and with some trepidation, some hesitation, I want to add that we are exploring tentatively the option of whether or not we might be able to extend this service to patrons beyond Penn State. We have what are called limited accounts, which can be set up by anyone at accounts.psu.edu. These accounts allow visitors to log into Penn State workstations when they're actually physically on campus. It may be possible for that same account to allow remote access to designated machines like those in Microforms. There are lots of technical, security, and policy issues that would need to be resolved, but at least theoretically, if we could get this to work, any student, scholar, or community member could access our Microform collections from any location. Should this happen, we'll be sure to spread the word. In the meantime, stay tuned. While we explore the dream of offering remote access to everyone anywhere, we continue to support interlibrary loan as a mechanism for supplying content beyond Penn State. We do lend our microfilm reels, and as mentioned previously, we will also make scans on request, and these are usually for specific articles. This slide shows the variety of institutions that have requested scans from Penn State Microformat materials in fall 2021. We assume responsibility for filling these requests, taking advantage of our existing expertise while freeing up interlibrary loan staff to focus on other formats and requests. Responding to these requests from users outside Penn State helps our reference desk assistants gain greater familiarity with collections that may not be used locally. And I want to make sure to give a shout out to our 3 fantastic reference desk assistants this semester. So thank you, Allison Eldridge, Claudia Lombardo, and Sally Wetzel for helping patrons in person and also making scans. A few more kudos. In addition to the presenters today and the Microform staff that I mentioned, many others contributed to getting these services launched. Ruth, Miriam, and Banu and Charlie implemented the code for adding the scan request link that has been so popular in the library catalog. Meg Massey was very generous with her expertise and experience with interlibrary loan scanning service, which helped us as we thought about launching our own. And Shane Burris, also an interlibrary loan, helped develop the custom scan request form that we looked at earlier. So thank you to everyone. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about mass digitization. And so we've made great progress in breathing new life into our microformat collections, making them easier to access at point of discovery. That said, there's no doubt that for many patrons, the ideal scenario is one where everything has been digitized and is available online. When we get a scan request, we first check to see if an electronic equivalent is available. And in fact, often we're able to direct patrons to a library database or a free site like the HathiTrust Digital Library. Typically, these users are fully satisfied with that option, and we are delighted to be able to connect the patron to the information they need, even if they're not using the microfilm. We want them to use the microfilm, but we definitely point them to the direction of the online when we discover it. So on the screen is a rapidly expanding player in the area of microformat digitization. And I expect most of you already know that the Internet Archive has done mass digitization of books and other materials. More recently, they've begun to branch out, and they started approaching academic libraries, and they were offering to digitize any microfilm reels that would be donated by libraries to them. They have developed workflows for rapid digitization and want to keep their pipeline full. At the information I attended, they indicated they could easily handle hundreds of thousands of reels. This slide shows materials from one library partnership. This is specifically a project to scan government in documents. And in an announcement in March, the Internet Archive said that they had scanned in 70 million pages from over 1 million microfiche cards. And they're also looking for other libraries to contribute content to grow this collection. So they're not anywhere near done. Another project the Internet Archive has undertaken involving microfilm is they acquired the old Serials in Microfilm collection, which some of you may know from UMI, and then it was bought out by ProQuest. And then as microfilm sort of lost its commercial viability, the Internet Archive was able to acquire the masters. And so this collection contains over 14,000 titles with an estimated 500 million pages. You can see they've already digitized close to 2 million unique items. So they're making progress, so got a ways to go. There are some issues with the Internet Archive approach. I'm not a huge fan of how they display serials. So if you were to click on, for example, the New York Times, you'd get a seemingly random assortment of the 26,000 items. An item is basically each issue of the paper. So you get 6,000 issues of the newspaper in no apparent order. There's also serious questions about entrusting the long-term preservation of a scholarly record to a single entity, even one with as trusted and with as good a track record as the Internet Archive. So if you are considering, I do mention this though, partly because we're ending up referring patrons to this material rather than making scans ourselves with increasing frequency. And also, if you are one of those libraries that's considering withdrawing your microfilm, I would encourage you to reach out to the Internet Archive to see if that material might be of interest to them for digitization rather than just simply losing it. We actually did have a collection that we were withdrawing. It was a duplicate, and we reached out to the Internet Archive. They looked it up. They said, we've already digitized this, but it was a good contact. It was a good outreach effort to make. It made me more comfortable about withdrawing that material from our collection and from the scholarly record. Now, if your library is more interested in doing it yourself, I would just briefly mention, and we can discuss it more in the Q&A, that there are high-speed scanners that we've looked at that can scan an entire reel of microfilm in minutes. Alternatively, there are vendors who are happy to do this for you for a fee, and they will send the files, or in some cases, they'll host the files for you, again, for a fee. One way or the other, whether it's Internet Archive or doing it yourself or paying somebody to do it, it seems like the future of microfilm is probably going to be digital, and we will be aggressively pursuing those options as we continue to look to enhance the discoverability and usefulness of our collection. I'm going to pause. That was a lot of me talking. I hope that was interesting. And I want to conclude with this slide, which summarizes some of the details. And I'll leave this up here for your reference. It also includes our contact information. And I'll just repeat that we're happy to discuss our experiences, answer any questions, and I look forward to the conversation. And now I'm going to stop. That's all I've got to say.
Awesome. So there is an opportunity, obviously, to put your questions in the chat while you're doing that. And I did see there were a couple above for us to respond to. I'm putting the evaluation survey link in the chat. It's important that you please take the time to submit your responses, as we are required to submit evaluation data as part of our LSTA grant application. So I just want to make sure to plug that out there if you could fill out the survey before you leave. But with that, again, please put questions in the chat. There are a couple that were on here. Have you been able to determine yet if there is actually increasing microform usage and how it might affect needs to replace or at least increase preservation?
Yeah, so we definitely are seeing a very steady use in the scan requests. As far as how it compares to our in-person activity, I haven't taken a look at that. It's kind of, we're doing both. So I would say just, it's definitely increased demand for the microformat materials, just because it's in addition to the folks who used to come in. Excuse me. The remote option is actually kind of lesser used once now that the building is fully reopened, but we like to have that option available. We have gotten inquiries from folks who are not located at University Park who've wanted to use that, as well as people who, for one reason or another, are reluctant to come into the library or just find it more convenient. So I think it's essential as there's more and more push to downsize physical collections, that the material demonstrate value, and having people, we now have records of collections that we wouldn't have had documentation that it was being used before. Again, I think to those undergrad students, we don't see a lot of undergrad students in person previously, some that were highly motivated, but not, we're seeing much more of those. And they're using collections that maybe they wouldn't have used in the past because they would have just decided it was too much hassle. And so that's all getting recorded then to show that there are people interested in this material. So those are my thoughts on that. I don't know, Shu, if you had anything to say about statistics. I'm not sure we've analyzed the data just yet as far as the in-person use versus the remote versus the scanning.
Yeah, we haven't, but I agree with you what you said. I think it's been, yeah, we have not taken the statistics or anything on that, but it's a good thing, good suggestion. Maybe we'll try to do it. And the preservation part we've been doing on regular basis. Like Eric said, once we handle it, so it's less damage to our collection, so.
I personally have I work with the history department in my the other part of my responsibilities, and I take a very long view towards collections. And so I'm very much invested in the idea that we're going to save this material for future generations.
Yes. And we are saving it.
And we are, and we've purchased, acid-free boxes. We've done other remedial repair work to make sure that this content is accessible for as long as it needs to be.
We have another question. Are there plans to mass digitize GPO microfiche now that it's being discontinued?
So I'm the only effort, I remember there was an effort, must have been 7, 8 years ago, that I believe University of Wisconsin was spearheading to digitize the GPO materials. And I haven't really kept up on that. My co-coordinator, our government documents librarian, would probably be more familiar with that. As I mentioned, the Internet Archive is doing some of that, and they are looking for partners. Oops. So this material are scans from government document microfiche, and they're mostly focusing on the Foreign Broadcast Information Service and the JPRS, but they are looking to get other material. My guess is if you reached out to them and said, we've got some microfiche we'd like to see scanned, that they would be very receptive to that based on prior conversations. But there may actually be other people who are more informed about that amongst the attendees as far as the government documents piece.
I did answer that question, but it went to the one person only. That since GPO just announced that they are not going to be publishing on microformats anymore, we have these things in our, in the future meetings to discuss about this. So we'll see where we go from here.
Thank you.
Yeah. If anyone else has any other questions or comments, feel free to throw them in the chat box.
I'd love to hear if anybody's doing any exciting, cool things. We'd love to learn from our peers. Anybody still have microfilm?
I will say this is a crazy project. The remote access is really really interesting. About the support at the time. So the patron got the email for the appointment, and was the Zoom support session started kind of at the same time, or did they do that themselves?
Oh, yeah, good question. So when there's an email that's sent out that confirms the time, and there's also a calendar invite. That email includes a link to the Zoom session that we schedule. So at the time that they log into the WebLabs, they're also directed to a URL where they can join us on Zoom, and we'll have a staff person there.
Thanks.
And it's, I think it's
usually we ask them to give us 2 days time to schedule. So it's not a schedule as they send email to us, a request. We need some time period to schedule. So it gives them enough time for me to schedule, for us to schedule, and for them to be prepared to view the microfilm.
And in general, somebody walking up to a microfilm machine in person is often going to struggle to figure out how to use it. The machines have gotten very complicated. I struggle to figure out how to use it, a new machine, when we get one. So we always, that's why we have people available in person, and we try to replicate that for the remote access option, because that just adds another layer of not really complexity, but maybe unfamiliarity.
I think it's great that you're being proactive in that way, anticipating that there'll be needs and setting that up for them. We do have another question. So we've been considering options, parentheses. I've got our whole library staff watching with me, close parentheses. But what advice would you have for wanting to do similar budgets, but with much less of a budget?
Similar project with more.
Yeah. And I kind of expected somebody to ask that question, because, when I'm giving out the kudos, I'm mentioning like a dozen different people. And so I do want to, clear, I think, Dan can talk about how much time he devoted to this. This is a part of my job, but it's not a full-time thing. This is something that I do as maybe like a quarter of my responsibilities, and the services we're talking about now are a portion of that portion. Setting it up definitely required some work on Dan's end, and then setting the link up in the catalog record. I don't want to speak for folks there, but my impression was it wasn't terribly difficult, but it did require some expertise there. But it wasn't a huge investment of time. And now that it's set up, it pretty much, it's going. Similarly with the WebLabs, it's there. We've been able to fold this into our existing operations in Microforms so that we can support someone working remotely, or our desk staff, for example, can be scheduled on our service desk, but then they can also make a scan because our machines are right next to our service desk. So to the extent that we're able to, we're trying to take advantage of efficiencies by multitasking. And so, even theoretically, we've talked about, we could have someone on Zoom supporting a remote access patron while they're at our service desk, available to an in-person, any in-person traffic. So I think there are ways to economize. We can talk to you about, I'm sure our folks who set up the catalog links, for example, would be able to share the code that they use to get you a jump start on that. The remote access, we use WebLabs, but I know that there are other sort of remote desktop kind of applications that might require some, maybe a little less tech support. Dan might be able to talk about that. I'm going to stop rambling and pass that on.
No, I definitely agree with that. We're kind of spoiled here being backed by a large university because we utilize these central services to put this in place. So, the Ericom Connect software was already purchased by Penn State, and, we obviously have our Zoom accounts that are already paid. So it's, a lot of this took a lot of that cost off of the libraries in general. But yeah, I agree with Eric. There's other ways to do remote access, depending on the security practices and kind of the standards at your locations. Look into, there's things like TeamViewer or LogMeIn, other remote access tools that kind of can get a user connected to a computer. So, you can explore those options. Various price ranges, but I think you can find something a little, less complicated and a little more budget friendly than what we're using to do this. It may require your users or your patrons to install, an additional client or something. We had we were lucky in that, it all happened in the web browser for patrons, but there's definitely ways to go about it. Just, I think finding that right remote access tool that can do it easily and budget consciously is the big thing.
And I will add that once that request link, a scan link was in the catalog, which is really driving a lot of traffic. Many of those scans are made by our part-time reference assistants, and unfortunately we don't pay them as much as we should, but that does mean that it's not super expensive as far as getting that, offering that service. And we'd be happy to talk to you about, where we might have some advice or where we might be able to jumpstart things so that you don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, we still have a little time if people have questions. I'm going to do my wrap-up notes, but again, not that you have to leave if you still have questions. But I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to thank Eshu, Sandy, Eric, and Dan for presenting for us. I hope everyone will take a few moments to complete our survey and let us know your thoughts about the presentation today and about our programming in general. As a reminder, the recording of this presentation will be available to PALA members early next week and on the CRD YouTube channel. If you're not a PALA member and you're interested in becoming a member, please feel free to contact me or anyone from our team, and we'll have the appropriate person contact you. I also invite you to contact us if you have suggestions for future discussions and presentations, and I most definitely invite you to contact one of us if you would like to present. So I hope you have a wonderful day. If you need to go, if you still have questions, again, feel free to hang around and let us know that.
Thanks for coming, everybody.